I have a printed copy in front of me. So with today's meeting start, thank you, Ms. Anderson, for the quorum. And with that, I guess I'm going to just turn it off to our city manager, Mr. Greg Clifton, and do introductions and start off our today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, committee. I hope everybody's doing well. A very beautiful day out there. We will kick this one off to our consultants, the team including Steve Lynn, Mary Rowley, and Meredith Ford. Mary, is it Rowley or Rowley?
It's Rowley, but
okay.
Everybody, including I, said Rowley when I was dating my husband. So he did not like that.
Rowley it is. And if I could lean on you folks to introduce your latest team member, who we had the honor of working with last week, but I don't think the committee knows her yet.
So our newest recruit is Marielle Babb. You can wave Marielle at everybody. Recent grad from the University of Arizona, and a great addition to our team. We're very happy to have her on board. And she did some support work on the results of the surveys under Meredith's guidance. So welcome.
Thank
Hi.
you. And I think,
Nice
oh, thank you, Marielle. Sorry to talk over you. It's so good to have you. And back to you, Steve and team. Would you like to kick this off?
Greg, thank you. I'm gonna check out and check back in because I'm not getting any sound at all. So Mary's gonna start anyway, and she can start, and I'll chime in a bit.
Okay. So we're gonna start. We're gonna walk through the community survey results from the sample, the representative sample that reflected the demography of Flagstaff. So, and Meredith's going to drive the slide presentation. So it looks like Steve needs to be admitted again. For some reason I can admit him, I'm not sure why, so I did. So let's go to the objectives and kind of review what we were trying to do. We wanted to get a sense from residents what they thought about public improvement projects that might be put on the November 2022 ballot. And per council's directive, we wanted to give everybody who wanted to have a viewpoint to be able to participate. That said, we also wanted to represent the demographics of the community because that is more likely to be statistically valid and give us better information than just a huge sample if it doesn't represent what a group is going to do. So let's talk a little bit about the methodology that we used. This was an anonymous community survey, as you know, because you all took your version of it. It included a survey link that was that was sent out so people could participate. We sent postcards to every household we could find in Flagstaff. The city gave us a list and we sent that out with a link and letting people know that paper copies were available at the libraries. So if someone couldn't take it online for some reason, they could take it at the library, and we collected those on the last day and made sure they were included. We offered it in English and in Spanish. Interestingly enough, no one took it in Spanish, but we believe firmly, again, in inclusion, we should offer it. So we did. It was a direct translation into Spanish. And of the responses, 14 were on printed versions. The vast majority was online. We were out in the field with this from mid-March to the end of the month. And what we have is a statistically projectable sample of 481 adults that were randomly pulled from the 1,385 total that we got. They were pulled so that they represent the makeup, the demographic makeup of Flagstaff. And that gives us a statistical variation of plus or minus 4% at a 95% confidence level. That tells us that if we repeated this 100 times, 95% of the time we get the same statistical variation. This is why we do the random samples. Okay, so just a little more on that. We try to be representative of the population. It gives everyone an equal chance because it is a random sample and it's anonymous to begin with. Again, we pull randomly and try to match the demographics of the population, which gives us a better chance to say, this is what the community thinks in terms of its representative groups. And the representation that we talk about is we surveyed Flagstaff residents 18 years old and older and corresponded it to the demographic makeup by age, sex, and Hispanic population. And we used the 2020 American Community Survey estimates to match those for Flagstaff. Okay, so let's start with the demographics. If we look at how long people have lived in the area, the largest group, 35%, have lived in Flagstaff more than 20 years. So these people have been around and know the community. The flip side of that is only 5% of the respondents have been here less than 1 year. So you've got a group of people who, for the most part, have lived in the community long enough to know something about it. Let's talk about where they're from in Flagstaff. The largest group was West Flagstaff, which was a quarter of the respondents, but that was followed closely by East Flagstaff, which at 22%. So those are really close. The smallest group at 10% was Cheshire and beyond, and 2% told us they preferred not to tell us where they lived. And they had that option, so we let them do that. Then we look at the gender, and we try to again match what the community looks like. We were, of the respondents, 50% female, 47% male, 2% non-binary, and 1% that, once again, they don't want to tell us. So they didn't. And I'm not sure how much everybody can read the data on the screen. So if I'm reading too much to you, please let me know. But I'm assuming some of this may be hard to read because it's so much information. And we will be giving this in a report so that Shannon can put it up on the committee's SharePoint so you can have it to look at. So the age groups, the largest group at a little over 27% were people who were 25 to 44 years old. Of the older residents, 65 plus, that group came in at about 16.4% of the population. And the smallest group was 18 to 24-year-olds at 6.2%. And with that, we tried to look at, again, random sample, but knowing that, yes, you have a large population that are university students, they probably don't tend to vote in Flagstaff. All right, let's look at race next. And we have race and ethnicity separate because we follow the way the census tracks this. So that's, on the next slide, you'll see ethnicity. The largest group by far were white, almost 90%, 88.8. And other groups that may be of interest, 1.9% were Native American, and a little over 2% were mixed race. And 1.7% were Black or African American. In terms of ethnicity, this mirrors the race in that 84% said they are not Hispanic or Latino, 15% were, and again, we had our 1% that just didn't want to share that with what they were with us. So they preferred not to tell us what they are. Next, we look at education, and not surprisingly, Flagstaff is very, very well educated community. Nearly 46% have attended graduate school or completed a master's or doctoral degree, which is highly, highly educated. 35% have a bachelor's degree. Again, really well-educated community. Of those who did not complete high school, it was only 0.6%. On household income, the largest group, 38%, which this is not surprising, again, looking at the education. They tend to sometimes correspond. 38% earn 100,000 or more a year for annual household income. And if you combine the groups that earn 49,999 or less, that comes in at a little under 20%, just to give you, again, a sense of the community. All right, so let's see whether they're voters. 95% said, yep, I'm registered to vote in Flagstaff. 4% said, no, I'm not. And once again, 1% this time didn't know whether they were registered or not. Do they plan to vote? 97% plan to vote in November. So that means 3% more who aren't registered are going to get themselves registered if they do what they say they're going to do and vote. 1% said, nope, I'm not going to vote. And 2% this time said they weren't sure. So again, the vast majority plans to vote, is registered to vote. And that's the people we care about for election. So we also asked them about their historical participation in elections. 91.5% voted in the last general election in November of 2020. And you can see as time goes past on other elections that it was slightly lower. Also for primaries versus general election, that tracks with national trends. And of this group of respondents, 7% roughly had voted in none of these elections. Now, some of that may correspond to those who are not registered. So let's get to what you really care about, which is, what do they think about the bond maker?
So I'll take it from here. Mary, can you hear me okay? Because I can barely hear anybody else. Okay, as long as you can hear me, I'll go through these, and what we'll do is go through them once and then be able to go through them again, take any questions and all questions that you have as we give you the information. So we asked, as we asked you when you took the survey, kind of your initial importance rating of the various project types that we'd be discussing. And you can see here that housing and stormwater were the leaders, with energy efficiency coming in third, and public safety infrastructure fourth in the initial impression phase. Next slide, please. This is just a reflection of the same information. Again, housing was very important to an awful lot of people. Stormwater and wastewater came in second, followed by sustainability, energy efficiency, and transportation, and then the public safety group. Next. So how likely would you be to vote for these bond issues? Again, leading the way would be stormwater and wastewater, followed very closely by housing, and then public safety and infrastructure, and sustainability roughly at the same level. If you add both the definitely and the maybe, that would give public safety a slight edge. Next. We then went into the detailed project information as we did with the committee, and here are the results by category. This was the public safety display, which shows you that the wildland fire engine and water tankers was the leading category, or the leading project, followed by the radios, and then followed by the 911 towers and the pumper and ladder engine, in terms of very important, came in next, with the storage bays kind of picking up the bottom. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, because one of the things I will show you at the end of the presentation is how the initial impression changed or may have changed after going through all the projects individually. Next slide, please. So what we have here is a significant I don't know or not sure, which means that the public information campaign certainly will lessen that number as information gets out to the public in more detail about what these projects entail. Then I don't know was actually leading with energy, with the emergency radio second, and then the firefighting vehicles and storage coming in third. Next slide. Here's the wastewater and stormwater breakdown. Clearly, the increasing the capacity at the Spruce Wash was very high on the list. Again, followed by the increasing the capacity at Wildcat Hill treatment plant. Then energy efficiency projects, followed by the receiving station infrastructure upgrades, and then the Wildcat Hill treatment plant equipment upgrade, even though it had a large, somewhat important contingent, was lower on the very important scale. Again, when you even that out, take the next slide, please. You see that the stormwater diversion post floods was quite high. Then addressing the wastewater treatment needs was next. And again, the I don't knows or not sure was 20% of the sample. Next slide, please. I know this is going to be hard to read, but in terms of sustainability and the energy efficiency, just want to point out that on this one, the bike and pedestrian infrastructure was the largest recipient of very important votes, followed closely by the efficient small home build affordable rent incentive for property owners, followed by the home energy efficiency rebates and low-cost loans. And then most everything else was almost at the same level, down to the one that rated least importance was the bike share program and the electric car share program. Next slide. So interestingly enough, even though the bike and pedestrian infrastructure garnered a large percentage of the strike you as particularly important category, efficiency investments in Flagstaff's homes was second, followed by the I don't know and not sure, and of course public information, because there were so many projects and each of them needed somewhat more information that people would be able to digest and react to. And then finally, investment in the city's facilities and community hubs coming in at 11%. Next slide. So here's the housing group. Here you would see almost identical responses to city-owned housing redevelopment and repurposing existing buildings. Those were virtually identical in the important or somewhat very important or somewhat important category. And then there was a cluster of projects that were basically in the same range next: local housing assistance, eviction protection and homeless diversion, the private sector affordable rental, the land development and acquisition assistance, home buyer down payment and assistance loans. Those were kind of all in the same general category. The next slide, please. And so increased affordable rental housing options was significantly higher than the self-sustaining loan funds or the increased emergency housing programs, with a 14% not sure or don't know. Next slide. So we, of course, ask the pre-question, and then we ask a post-question after we've talked about projects to see what differences there might be. And so this next slide will show you a comparison of the two. And what we've done here is to show you how giving the information about projects has affected the answers that we got. And I'll go through them in order. Housing started out exceptionally high to begin with, and actually gained 3 percentage points after the projects were enumerated. Stormwater and wastewater was also pretty high, and actually they sort of traded between definitely important and maybe important. That 5.2 up and down kind of evened those two out. Public safety infrastructure up 2.5% from the first initial response, and the maybe was down very, very slightly from the first time through. And then sustainability lost 0.5 point on the definitely voting for, but was up 2.33% on the maybe voting for. So this will give you some idea of the shifting that went on in terms of people's response to the four categories after hearing all of the projects that were involved in each one. Next slide, please. So what we tried to do in the same way we did for the committee is to assign a rating system for very important or somewhat important responses. And because we were dealing with so many more respondents, almost 500, the points are going to be astronomically larger than they were for the 17 of you. But you'll understand that they're going to be shown in descending order, all 30 projects from the most important and somewhat important composite scores all the way down the list. Yeah, this, I think, is one of the more important slides that we'll show you, because it really captures what the community is feeling about all these projects top to bottom. Next slide, please. So here's the list. The number one project from the community by a substantial margin was the increased capacity of the Spruce Wash project, followed immediately by the wildland fire engine and water tankers project, and then the increase in capacity at Wildcat Hill Treatment Plant. Now, I want to point out that when you take those three projects alone, you're almost at $50 million, those three projects alone. And so as you go down the list, you really, if we're still looking at providing the mayor and council with a group around $70 million, you don't go very far down that list before you run out of capacity. But you can see that all the way down the list, these are the in order priorities. I think the other thing to point out here is that either the infrastructure group, building efficiency and transportation, is either not very well understood, or conversely has much more support at the council level than it might generally in the community. And that may have to do with council setting policy and not necessarily communicating that to the general public. We don't know what the reason would be, but a lot of those projects fell down to the way below the second half of the list. So as we did for you, we took these 30 projects then and ranked them in order within the categories. And here's what that looks like. Next slide. Within public safety, the wildland fire engine and water tankers came in first, the vehicle radio second, the towers third, the pumper and ladder fire engine came in fourth, and then the storage bays were fourth. You'll notice as we go through these, unlike the slides we showed you, there are no red lines here. We arbitrarily picked a number to show you how that would look. One of the things you will need to do going forward is determine how many of these projects will be in your package recommendations to mayor and council. And once you make those recommendations, we will draw a line below whichever projects you recommend. Next slide. So here are the water, stormwater, and wastewater projects in order. And as you can see, and as I mentioned from the long list, $47 million was high priority for them. And so the first two certainly were very, very high on the public's list. So followed by energy efficiency, followed by the infrastructure upgrades, and then the Wildcat Hill treatment plant upgrade came in fifth. Next slide. Here are the energy efficiency and transportation projects in order. And what we've done here is where we might have had ranges, we're using one of the numbers just to give you a sense of how those might fit into a package that you might put together. Again, the bike and pedestrian infrastructure led the way in this category for $8 million, followed by small home builds, affordable rent incentive for property owners, and so on down the list. Electric car program and bike share were at the bottom, significantly less popular than the other projects in this category. And then finally, for housing, the projects that ranked the highest were the city-owned housing redevelopment project, the repurpose existing buildings project, and then the local assistance programs, then private sector affordable rental, the home buyer down payment assistance, the eviction protection, and the land development acquisition assistance were kind of in a bunch. And then the health and safety home repair needs were the lowest in that category. So next slide. When we talk about next steps, my suggestion to the committee is that you take a look at those 4 categories in terms of the priorities based on the information that the public has provided to you, and make any rearrangements of those priorities that you see fit as a committee, and where you wish to make a recommendation to mayor and council that might be different from the ranked priorities that came through the survey. Determine where a red line might be drawn in each category, and as we add up those numbers, review the package that then would be ultimately submitted to mayor and council once the committee has made a commitment to the package. So that's essentially how we might proceed going forward. And let me stop there. And now, and I'm really sorry that I'm having trouble hearing, but I'll do the best I can with questions, and we'll go back to any slide you'd like to look at more carefully. I know it's a lot of information, and it really is a data dump at this point, and you may want some time to review all of this information before you go too much farther down the road, but that is where we are at the moment.
All right. Thank you, Steve, very much for the presentation. Yes, I do see some hands up. The first one I'd like to go to is Ms. Morano. If you can go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, thanks. So I have a couple of questions. One is, have you considered at all combining the committee's scores with the public scores, or did this do that?
No, we have not considered it, and I would tell you that the reason we asked the committee to take the survey first was more about getting you familiar with the process than it was about determining with certainty how the committee might ultimately decide to vote. It was an initial impression. And the difficulty is that, as Mary explained to you, the predictability of what might happen with the public is only available to us with a stratified sample that we have been able to put together in the 481 responses. To combine the two is really an apples and oranges comparison, and it would have no validity if we put them together or compared them.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I would also argue that everybody on this committee are part of the voting public. And considering that we've had significant information given to us, that much of that will then be given to the public about what these projects are, it seems like there needs to be some sort of way to incorporate our thoughts on what projects are important as well.
Well, let me just mention that the priorities that came out of the survey are the public's responses to the questions asked. The committee has the authority, as I understand it, to rearrange those priorities against either their own priorities as they took the survey, or any other priorities that they feel would be appropriate to recommend to mayor and council. Again, all of this information will be made available to the council, so they will have the benefit of seeing what the survey produced, as well as the information that the committee finally puts together as a recommendation. So it's not an either or proposition. You don't have to take one over the other, and you certainly have the ability to rearrange those priorities as you see fit. That's why we listed that in the next step category.
Okay, thanks. I've got one more question, and then I'll turn it over to the next person. But I'm also curious. I noticed that in the first couple of graphs, it was very clearly that housing was the runaway winner of the preferences of the public. But then when it came to the ranked choice, or the ranking where you had assigned values, I can't remember, but I think the first housing measure was like 5th on the list or something like that. And where the safety measures had been, 3rd and 4th, they were suddenly up at the top of the list. And I'm just curious how that happened. Is it simply because of that second choice of likely to vote for? Or I don't remember the way it was worded either, but is that why that order changed so much?
Well, remember that we rank those against highly important and somewhat important. And in some cases, you get a higher score for a vote of highly important, a lower score for somewhat important. In some of the categories, they might have been lower in the very important category and higher in the somewhat important category, and it might have moved them up in the order. What you see is a combination of those two responses in the numbers that show you the relative ranking of all 30 projects.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Good questions. Mr. White, you were the next one with the hand raise.
Al, you're on mute.
There it is. Okay, I'm unmuted. So at some point in time, is this committee going to have the opportunity to sit together in a room with these charts in front of us?
That's a question above my pay grade, Al.
Yeah, so either Miss Anderson or Mr. Clifton would have to answer that.
I will suggest that we're here to work at your pleasure on this. The data is to inform the discussion, but we haven't prescribed how that discussion should occur. You've had some recommended next steps, but if there's a desire to meet either in person or virtually and just kind of dissect the data in the charts.
So,
yeah.
The previous question raised a good point, and that point was, I think, that that the categories have a tendency to have individual items within the categories that have higher rankings than others, and so they raised. So, in certain circumstances, a complete package being recommended to the council may have elements of all of these things that end up adding up to 50 million, 20 million, 30 million, 110 million, whatever. But for us to get started and have those rankings, and I want to say, like, the last 4 or 5 slides that we saw in front of us, and the opportunity to talk to each other about our reasoning for our choices and our suggestions. It just sounds like we can eliminate an awful lot of things right up front, and maybe get a common sense of purpose that we can then hone into a recommendation within a couple of meetings, because there's going to be an awful lot of, I want this and I like that, and I think this for this reason. And it's really tough to get that out in this format, I think. And so and of course, I'm old school, and I come from meetings where we all sat together and went back and forth, as opposed to one person at a time, and no real way to record, at least in front of me with a piece of paper I can check off comments on the various categories without taking extensive notes while I'm trying to listen. That's all. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I know, the last, basically committee I was aware of that kind of formed, that saw success in the last election was the 419 renewal. That was pre-COVID, and so they did all meet together, and it was very successful, and it had a really very successful voting record of passage among the community. And I understand, Vice Chair, what you're saying, that it is kind of nice. I am ready to be more in person. I know this has been pretty convenient for us since we've been meeting fairly since before the holidays, before I think Thanksgiving or right around there. And so, doing it this way has been convenient, and I'm sure convenience is for a lot of people.
Excuse me, Charlie. It's a great way to receive information and presentations.
Yeah.
But it's not a great way to interface and debate. I think and debate. I don't want that debate to have discuss is a better word.
Right.
And share thoughts.
Yeah.
Reasons why I think are very important too. And they're not in a presentation. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, very well taken. And so with that, I think I'm gonna have Miss James with her hand raised. So I'm gonna turn it over to her for the moment.
Great, thank you, Charlie. So I'm Michelle James. I wanted to support what Al was saying, and you as well, Charlie, about us getting together in a room, because I'm starting to think about how to actually do this. And I think having other people in the room and a big chalkboard or something we can write on, whiteboard, to start figuring this out would be really advantageous, I think, to the group. Since there's only 17 of us, we could get in a big room, and I think it would be okay. The other question I have is, I'm trying to track I spent a lot of time with the report that was done for the 17 of us on the committee, because I actually had a PDF of that, and I started looking at that, and I'm wondering about the categories. First of all, the categories, the 4 categories that were determined, are those set in? Is that how we want to do it, or does the committee have an option to rearrange those categories, just out of curiosity, or take one out or something like that? It seems like those things are on the table. And then within that, what I was noticing is that there was some language in some of the answers that were in the report for the 17 of us, and I couldn't link that back to the list of projects that Shannon Anderson sent out with the email this week. And for instance, the one says repurpose existing buildings. And that came up high even in what you presented today as something within the housing program that was a high priority, but I can't see where that links to the actual project. And maybe it's just because I have to look back into the project again, but if we could use the same language to make sure, or somehow link repurpose existing buildings for housing, which question or which project does that link back to in the list of projects we got presented to us in housing? So
I think Meredith may be able to clear that up. Meredith?
Okay. That would be helpful for us.
Yes. Hi, Michelle. For the sake of the presentation and the graphing, we condensed the wording. So I do have a sheet that I can share with you that links directly back to what the specific question on the survey said and how it was presented here. The shorthand form was intended to capture the spirit of it. But to be frank, there wasn't enough room to write the full. I'm happy to make that information available to you.
That would be very helpful to have that cross-reference to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. Great,
Absolutely.
thank you.
I will say, let me just jump in here because I'm having a very difficult time hearing everybody, and I apologize for that. It's my problem, not yours. Teams doesn't like me. It's not. I have I do great with Zoom and other things, but Teams is not my deal. So I'm gonna check out and try to come back in, but I want to go back to something that the vice chair said, because I think it is exactly the way you ought to proceed. And that is to have those 5 pages, the 4 categorical pages, and then the full list, those 5 pages in front of you, and to sit down, whether it's this way or in person, is certainly up to all of you. But if everybody had those 5 pages in front of them, I think you'd be able to begin to build either from the top down, or Al, your suggestion from the bottom up, the ones that you want to eliminate first, whichever way you go. At some point, you will get to a package that you're willing to recommend to the mayor and council. And I think that is the way forward for you to get to an answer.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
I'm going to try to come in again in a minute. Mary, it's on you.
Okay. With that, we just heard from 3 of the committee members that do like the in-person thought, kind of, as get everything in front of us and look at it and then kind of hash it out and try to prioritize. And then within that, make a recommendation to the council. So I was wondering, maybe if Ms. Anderson could just maybe keep a tally if the committee members that are with us today could maybe put in the chat box, do they like that idea? Would it work for them? As we're kind of going into the home stretch with this committee. Does that seem fair?
If I may, Chair, it's a very good suggestion. For those who may not have access to chat, perhaps we can hear from them verbally. I see a number of people already populating the chat column, but for anybody who can't do that, please speak up.
So if they could maybe do a hand raise. Ms. James, I see your hand still raised. Is that just from previous?
Yes, that was from previous, but I obviously am supportive of getting together.
Okay, thank you. And from the chat that I'm seeing, it looks like a great idea to get us in person and get us back to those pre-COVID discussions in person, and with that, making a good recommendation to the council that will see success in November of whatever that may be. So I do see the vice chair with his hand raised. So go ahead, Al.
Thanks. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of maybe the Aquaplex meeting room where you've had some retreats, council retreats, you have room for an audience in there. Not that we would have an audience, but we would certainly have room to spread tables around and do social distancing, a couple of feet between us, if that was a concern, and still be able to be in the same room and have the flip charts necessary to kind of reflect consensus as it's arrived at. So I don't know, Greg, how tough that is to set up in terms of it being open again, or whether or not you have the capability of just setting that aside. It just comes to my mind. I know that we used to do some decent council retreats there that were able to accommodate a good number of folks.
Thank you. You're generous with your suggestion that I have that kind of authority. I do not, but I do have the ability to find out if it's available, and I'm glad to do that. Before I do, it would be good to hear from the committee. Would this be in lieu of the regular scheduled meeting Thursday at 4 o'clock? Number one. Number two, I could look at Aquaplex. We have another facility at the Public Works Core Services building. Not as close probably to some. That's out on Route 66 over by Woody Way. That's an option. And then always City Hall's an option. But we could start with the Aquaplex, and I just need feedback as to the time and date. And I'll make that query as we're speaking today.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Clifford. Me personally, we've committed to ourselves again since the holidays of last year of this time frame, and and I myself have other responsibilities with some other organizations here in Flagstaff at this time, and I've told them all that this is my number one priority is this committee, and I believe everybody that's here has also made that commitment to the community and serving. And so, and yes, from Mr. Byer, who asked the question, we're going to steal what date are we going to choose, and his suggestion was what I just said. And I think if everybody's in agreement of that, I think we should just stay with this Thursday at 4 o'clock, and again commit ourselves to the 5:30 end time, and move forward. And if we can meet again next week, just to kind of keep ourselves moving in a positive direction and have an outcome that we need to kind of wrap up soon. With the timelines of elections and things like that. So, and I see Miss Anderson has her hand up.
Thank you, Chair Odegaard. Just a point of clarification. Do you want all of the remaining meetings through May to be in person or just a certain number?
Personally, I don't know that question. I'm assuming we're going to have the next 2 to 3 meetings in person, no question.
Yeah.
But, and we'll see where we're at, as a committee after probably 3 weeks. 'Cause I think we'll be pretty close to making a recommendation after 3 weeks.
Okay, I will check with them on those dates then. Thank you for the clarification.
Charlie, I agree, and I think 3 days. I mean, if we set them all up to be somewhere at the same time, if we finish our work in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we can finish up on online afterwards. But I would definitely give us at least 3 meetings together to hash it out.
Is there anybody else in the committee that would like to respond or make a comment, either by raising your hand or make sure you put something in the chat box if possible? Let's see here. Vice Chair, did you have another comment you wanted to make, or you just hand raised was by mistake?
No, I'm taking it down.
Okay.
I put it up and forget to take it down. Okay. I kind of just shouted it out. So yeah. So yeah. Thanks.
No. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Miss Anderson real quick, and then Mr. Ghetto had his hand raised.
I was just going to clarify for the group that I will work with the Aquaplex to see if we can at least keep a hybrid meeting. So if somebody can't attend at the last minute, they can still jump on Teams. I think that would be most convenient for our New Point team members also who are not here local. So I will work to make sure that we can have some access virtually as well.
Okay, thank you. And that was also in the back of my mind because we'd hate to add to the expense of this with our partners in making the travel arrangements. So thank you. And Mr. Ghetto.
Thank you, Chair. Great meeting. I think it's a groundbreaker that we meet in person. I think it'll be a lot more efficient. I'm wondering if anybody can give us some guidance as to how that maps out. So the first meeting, do we try and find a methodology to shrinking this list, bottoms up, tops down? I mean, has anybody ever had experience with anything like this that they can give us ideas as to how we could be most efficient and thoughtful and compassionate, right? We can look at this just numerically and chop off everything on the bottom, but that wouldn't be fair. So we've got a lot of work, but the first meeting, probably we should just focus on how are we going to get down to that funnel where we make those recommendations.
Charlie,
Yeah, go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I think Steve Lynn had the point a few minutes ago, where we have the right paperwork in front of us that consolidates the projects and has the amounts next to it. The other thing that we should all keep in mind is that, you know, there's an amount that's recommended. In certain circumstances, I think that amount is a minimum needed. In other circumstances, you saw that you could break it down to smaller amounts. And so if we have the project, the category, the projects, and the amounts there, and each person has that in front of them, when we get together, that may be a point to launch from that point to launch how we'll go around the room and just get everybody's take on it, and someone keeps score. And I'm guessing that the consultants would be in that. And I'm not trying to assign work to them, and I don't know what you've contracted for, but, you know, I'm sure that you would have a hand in that, or you would want to have a hand in that in terms of how the thinking goes and how you use that in your education program later. Thanks. That's just a suggestion, and I'm open to hearing from everybody. Thanks.
Yeah, and I see Steve hand raised, so to answer some of
Thank
that.
you, Mr. Chairman. I think I think the Vice Chair was right on target. What I would suggest to Mr. Ghetto's question is that if you take a look at the overall ranking, that's the sheet with 30 projects on it, top to bottom, and you use that as information, it's input like everything else. But you start at the top, and the concern that I would have if I were a member of the committee is that if you take the top 3 projects off the top, certainly there's not much argument that those 3 projects are critical when you think about flooding in the community and about improvements that need to be made. And there are a series of improvements within each of those categories. But if you take those 3, you're already at roughly $50 million. And if you then start looking at the next group of priorities as listed, you should have a very robust discussion about which ones you think are a high enough priority to be in the package or not. And my suggestion would be that to the question that was asked earlier about categories and whether you go with 1, 2, 3, or 4, take a look at putting a package together and see what those look like in terms of priorities. And that would very well inform you as to whether or not you put 2 questions on the ballot, 3 questions on the ballot, 4 questions on the ballot. Those are recommendations that you have the ability to inform mayor and council about as you go through your deliberations. But I think you can make great progress if, number 1, you get hard copies of these 5 slides and sit as individuals between now and next week and kind of look at how things shape out and come with a series of questions about, well, don't you think this one is a higher priority than seems to be on the list? Get some consensus going, and you'll be in each other's presence, so that'll be an easier thing to do. And I think that you'll move fairly quickly to understand which projects would be above the line and which ones wouldn't in a total project kind of way. Then you can go back and actually yourselves draw the lines in each one of the categories to see how many projects are included and how many are not. And I think that would give you an opportunity. And once you get down to projects 6, 7, and 8, you see that there are ranges. And if there's any capacity left at that point, you can make a determination as to which part of the range you would like to fund. But I don't think, to be fair, I don't think this is an hours and hours away process. I think you'll make substantial progress next week, and probably with no more than 1 more meeting, you could probably put it to bed. That's based on all of the information I have about people using this methodology in the past.
Yeah, so thank you, Stephen. That's what I was thinking too. I was thinking maybe 3 meetings the most, and we'll be done. Um, but let's see here. Let's see if I've seen anything, comments in the chat box. Mr. Jim Hutchell had offered a Rio Atrium that we saw on our tour a few weeks ago. Is a nice facility if they can handle everything, is what Miss Anderson said. And of course, Mr. Musselman, our chief of police, offered a space. And Mr. Washington, one of our committee members, said he liked a hybrid because he does have other commitments. And let's see, I don't see anything else. I do have a question for Miss Anderson. Let me show you on my screen here. Let me turn my screen on. There we go. I got this list, which had some yellow marks in it. I was out of curiosity. I have a couple questions from this list before next week. Is why were there some yellow highlighted marks? I mean, forgive me if I missed it of explaining those yellow marks among this list of projects.
That's the one that I loaded. That's just the list of pricing, right, Charlie? Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm gonna go in and pull it up really quick because I don't think I remember seeing the yellow highlights, so I want to look at it again.
Maybe it was just my printer wanted to be colorful today.
I don't know. I've been having so many computer problems. I don't even want to guess at this point. So let me take a look at it and see if I can figure out if those were intentional.
Okay, and then one other question I had was next to the drainage improvements. There was a $3 million price tag, and then it said replace Killip School detention pond. So does that mean that 3 million is paid for? And I see Mr. Clifton with his hand raised.
Thank you, Chair. I'll address that one first, and then I'd like to respond to a question in the chat. It has been paid for. The Killip detention facility, we were under the gun on that time-wise and had to make some quick decisions. And as you will also see from that chart, there's been some funding of the fire department quints. Those are the ladder trucks. So hopefully that helps further inform the discussion. Paul Byer has asked about, we're getting into strategy here, and I think that's a discussion that has yet to take place with this committee. But the question is, can we propose a single housing ballot measure that includes several projects rather than having voters vote on each project? And I think the answer is a qualified yes. Of course, we're going to suggest a single ballot measure for each topic, or if the committee decides to combine things, we'll be interested in that. But I don't think we want to go to the voters with a long list of ballot measures, each one specific to a project. I do believe, Paul, and others can speak more eloquently to this, that there is benefit to specifying what the projects are that are being intended to be funded. I understand from the previous housing ballot measure that many have stated that there was not enough definitives to that question, and that might have been the cause for it not passing, even though it failed by a very small margin. So I do think there's intention here to see a little bit of specificity to the project so that the voters have a good idea what they're voting upon. Others may want to chime in on that, or we may want to defer that discussion until next week.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And Steve, you had your hand raised, and then I'll go to a couple of the committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to be clear that as your partners here, we want to be engaged in full disclosure all the time. So next week on the 21st, you will be ably guided through your process to the extent that you need any help from us by my boss, Mary Rowley. I will be in the hospital for some surgery, and even though I might be able to tune in that afternoon, I'll probably be goofier than usual with some anesthesia. So I'm going to take a break next week, but you're in capable hands with Mary as you go forward. And I do think, with all due respect, I think you've got all the tools to make this work, and I think you have a desire to make it work. So I'm very much confident that the next two meetings will be most productive.
Okay,
And I'm happy to
thank
help
you.
any way I can.
Yeah, and I wish you well with your that. And so thank you, Steve. Okay, Dara, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. For Steve, best of luck on your surgery. We will definitely be thinking of you. And apologize if I missed this somewhere along the way, but originally in the presentations from the different departments, we requested a prioritization list from them. So each of them that did come through with that, and I really appreciated it. Have we seen how that prioritization by those departments aligns with what the public shows is important to them? And if we haven't, can we get that added to the slides?
Yeah, thank
Is
you.
that a question for staff? I apologize.
Yeah.
I think it would mostly be for the team, maybe for staff. I'm not sure, whoever it would make most sense to just simply, I think it would be a matter of adding a column to that prioritization list, saying, this measure that the public greatly supported ranked, first, second, third, fourth, fifth on the list from the department.
From the Department of the City Department.
Yeah, that presented those measures that they were wanting to put on the ballot.
Yeah, I've been striving from the outset here not to have a situation where we have one department lobbying for one thing versus another department, and have tried to coach our staff to be in support of all of these on an equal basis. I want to respect your question, but I would very much like to avoid a situation where it looks like you have divisions in staff as to what should be advanced here.
Well, I don't think it's a question of what would be advanced between the different departments, more within. So, for example, did the public safety,
Okay.
the projects that are rising to the top, were those their top priorities too within their own needs? Or were
Forgive
those
me,
low
I did not
priority
understand.
for them?
Mm-hmm. Some of that has already occurred, and we can certainly invite further discussion on that. I know it did occur when Jim Huckel and others presented on the wastewater items. There was a prioritization, but that can be revisited. Yeah, and now I understand your question, and thank you.
Right, and just to clarify a little further, so they did their own prioritization. So if we could see how that aligns with then what has been expressed in the surveys, does that make sense? So
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you, committee member Dara. That was very good. Well taken. Ms. Sanderson, did you still want to make a comment?
I think I understand what you want now. Thanks.
No, that was very good. As we meet next week, before we do that, is possible, Ms. Sanderson, I know this probably might be asking a lot, so it might not happen till first part of next week, is those things that we've seen, which I assume might be kind of easy, is get those to us for the weekend. Maybe if we have a moment on our Easter Sunday and just kind of browse the slides, because sometimes, speaking for myself, I get kind of busy during the week, but Sunday I have a little more time just to kind of sit down and look over something. That was in the past, that when I was a council member, that was my Sunday, was always my day to kind of look over everything when I don't have so many other things coming at me. For when we met on Tuesdays, would that be possible, Ms. Anderson, to have those handouts sent to us by the weekend?
Yeah, I certainly could send you the presentation that you saw today. The cross-reference is going to take more time. I don't think that we'll be able to have that completed tomorrow. And I'm going to need help from city staff. So I imagine that we'll be able to work on the cross-reference of staff prioritization compared to the feedback from the community next week. And then I'll get you the recording as well as the presentation from today tomorrow.
Okay, and with those that you'll send out tomorrow, maybe if you could just bundle those items, whether it was the committee, the community, and so we all have like one spot in that email to look at those, and then we'll look for that other email for that cross-referencing. That would be great. So we don't try to go back through our emails and try to pull stuff together, if that makes sense.
Just clarify what you're asking. Is that just to resend the link for the citizen survey?
And
Spread
yep, and the
then
committee, and the
Okay.
committee, yep.
Okay.
So we're not trying to spend too much time ourselves to kind of pull everything together that we need to look at together as a committee when we meet in person next week or through that hybrid form. And then we'll look for that cross-referencing email before our meeting on Thursday. So Mr. Clifton, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We're set for the Aquaplex Thursday next week. At that time, if we could be a little bit nimble as to the future Thursdays, we'll have that information for you next week. Shannon, correct me if I'm misstating things, but our city council is retreating on the same day, and they will retreat. We will do everything we can to have them be concluded and have the room cleared by 4 p.m. So then this committee will come in, and I think we can have all the audio equipment just in place. There will be a convenience there. So we'll start at 4 o'clock at the Aquaplex conference room next week. And at that time, we will make an announcement as to future meeting venues. I think there's going to be a preference to stay at the Aquaplex, but allow us some time to make that determination. To the extent information is being disseminated, I would respectfully ask that we try to keep that under wraps with this committee. The folks in this room right now are the only people, I believe, that have seen the results of this survey. And the committee may have a desire to do some things differently than what the survey outcomes might suggest. And I think there could be potential detriment if the survey information was divulged publicly before the time that this committee has an opportunity to really digest it and come up with its own outcomes. I hope you could understand and appreciate that recommendation. And I see Devonna has her hand up.
Yeah, hi, sorry. So I was looking at the bond project list by category. And for example, it says like drainage improvements are 3 million, and then it says replaced by Killip School Detention. And we might have asked this and I was not following. So does that mean the total ask now in stormwater is reduced by 3 million because the 3 million came in for grant funds, so we're at 23 million instead of 26? Or is that not what I'm understanding it to say?
Thank you for the question, Devon. If I can jump, well, Shannon, you go ahead. You had your hand up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So Devonna, we're still looking at a feasibility study. These numbers and projects continue to be evaluated. And so the 3 million was originally for Killip School, but we've replaced it with just drainage improvements. Because again, we still need the 26 million. It's just no longer needed for Killip because we received the 3.5 million from elsewhere. Does that make sense?
Kind of, except that originally the need was 26 million and now it sounds like the need was 29.5 million. Because we got 3.5 million, but we still want to keep the ask. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes, we still want the ask, but when you add up everything that's in that spreadsheet, it is 26 million.
But it originally was for Killip, but now we're just going to replace it with a broader language of drainage improvements to still get 26 million.
Yeah, because it's still going to be needed for all of that drainage that goes through the Spruce Wash.
And I'll jump in if I may. I think it's a good question that Devon is asking. We don't have the outcome of the feasibility study's been produced, but it hasn't been costed out. We are understanding from the engineers that the costs are going to be significantly greater than what was initially presented to the city and to the city council. I think it's a discussion for this group to have as well. I'm not going to go as far as to suggest that if we fund a project for 3 million or even the fire ladder trucks for the 2 million or whatever that figure it is, that we're not changing other things. I would rather like to have the discussion with this group and you know, let you know and inform you as to what the total cost might look like. And if there's a desire to stay with the reduced amount, you know, we will certainly live with that on stormwater. I want to enlighten you all that we are pursuing all grants and appropriations and earmarks, everything for Spruce Wash and other items as we speak. We're meeting with Congressman O'Halloran tomorrow afternoon, and Spruce Wash will be a topic of the discussion. So we're not at the end of that story yet. We are trying to find all funds available, and this group will be well informed of what funds are realized for these projects. And thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Devonna, for the question, because I assumed that the stormwater ask was reduced to 23 million now that the detention basin at Killip School was taken care of through a grant process, but it just, and I can see why the wording replaced. That just means there's others potentials. All right. Any other hand raising with questions or comments before I guess we depart? Mr. Clifton has got direction where we need to go next week. So I don't see anything. So I think what we'll do is we'll just close out. We're not closing out too early, just a little bit. And again, I always like to leave off with the vice chair to make any closing comments if you'd like.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it. I guess I saw that it looks like Greg has to do a little hustling to get the council in and out and us in. Whereas I saw Dan Musselman was pretty comfortable with inviting us to the police station for that first one. Maybe I just want to throw that out there that it might make sense. But
if I may respond, I think there's actually a convenience factor to doing the Aquaplex because we'll already be set up there with some audio video. We will on our end, we'll get the room cleared by 4. I'll give you that assurance. Okay.
Sounds wonderful. And thanks. That's really all I have this time. I really appreciate everybody considering the fact that we might be wise to sit together now and begin to talk about this in a way that has a give and take and some reasons why and some reasons why not, and that may help us come to some. It might shine the light on the whole process of bonding and timing of bonds and so forth. I just saw in the paper that. Who else is going to go for a quick bond question? Somebody else is going for a bond question. You've got the community college coming out in May, but someone else is thinking about November now to ask for tax dollars, and that's always a consideration when you put these babies out there. So anyway, thanks again, and I appreciate the opportunity, Charlie. You're a good man.
I don't know. So thank you, Mr. Clifton. And thank you to the city council on offering that convenience to this committee and to make our first in-person meeting to go very well. So, and I really want to say thank you to all the committee members in your participation. We are on the home stretch. It's really close, and I really again just thank you for their commitment, and thank you for everybody that that did show up for the in-person meetings at the city facilities at the Rio and Wildcat, and I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I still learned a lot when I was at the Rio tour, and again apologize, Jim, that I couldn't make it out to Wildcat. So with that, I'm going to close today's meeting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody in person next week. So thank you, everybody, and happy Easter.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair.